I didn't ruin my life in one dramatic moment. I ruined it slowly, by choosing what was easy every single time it mattered. If you're listening to this late at night, half asleep, maybe hoping my story will distract you from your own thoughts, I want you to know something from the beginning. This isn't a confession about crime or betrayal. It's about something quieter. Something far more common. I destroyed my life by avoiding discomfort. For a long time, I believed I was doing the smart thing. I chose stability over risk. Silence over conflict. Familiar pain over uncertain change. And everyone around me told me I was doing great. That's the most dangerous part. When the world applauds you while you're disappearing. I remember the first time I felt the weight of that choice. I had been offered an opportunity that scared me. It would have required effort, learning, exposure, possible failure. My stomach tightened just thinking about it. So I said no. I told myself I wasn't ready. That it wasn't the right time. That something better would come along later. Later became my favorite lie. Each time I chose the easier path, I felt relief. Immediate, soothing relief. And each time, something inside me shrank a little. Not enough to notice right away. Just enough to make the next compromise easier. I built a life that didn't challenge me. A routine that didn't ask questions. Days that looked identical and therefore felt safe. I became very good at explaining my choices in ways that sounded responsible. Practical. Mature. But at night, when everything was quiet, I felt a strange tension in my chest. Not sadness. Not fear. Something heavier. Like grief without a funeral. I watched people around me change, grow, struggle, fail, succeed. I stayed the same. At first, that felt like control. Later, it felt like rot. The worst part was how convincing my excuses became. I told myself I was being patient. That my moment would come. That life was long. That there was no rush. Time believed me. It passed quietly. Years went by. Real years. And one day I woke up with a terrifying realization. I wasn't waiting anymore. I had settled. That word hit me harder than any insult ever could. Settled. As if this muted, carefully arranged existence was my final form. I started noticing how tired I was all the time. Not physically. Spiritually. Every small decision felt exhausting. I avoided new experiences because they required energy I no longer had. Or maybe energy I had trained myself not to use. I avoided conflict so well that I stopped having opinions. I avoided risk so thoroughly that desire itself began to fade. When people asked me what I wanted, my mind went blank. That scared me more than failure ever had. I realized that I had become someone who existed efficiently, but not honestly. I did what was expected. I showed up. I functioned. And I felt nothing while doing it. Sometimes I would catch my reflection and feel detached, like I was looking at someone who had inherited my life without understanding it. I didn't hate that person. I just didn't recognize them. The moment that broke me wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and humiliating. I overheard someone describing me as easygoing and low maintenance. They meant it as praise. All I heard was that I had made myself small enough to be convenient. That night, I lay awake replaying my life in reverse. Not the big events, but the choices. Every time I had stepped back instead of forward. Every time I had chosen comfort over growth. Safety over truth. Ease over meaning. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. I hadn't been unlucky. I had been careful. And that carefulness had cost me everything I once wanted to be. I understood then that regret doesn't always come from what you do wrong. Sometimes it comes from what you never dared to do at all. I wanted to scream at my past self. To shake them. To tell them that avoiding pain doesn't protect you from suffering, it just postpones it, stretches it thin across decades. That was the night I admitted the truth I had been avoiding for years. I wasn't stuck. I was choosing this life. And I was choosing it out of fear. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. And suddenly, every easy choice I had ever made felt unbearably heavy. Because I knew something else too. If I kept choosing what was easy, there would come a day when change was no longer an option. Not because it was impossible, but because I would no longer have the strength to attempt it. That thought terrified me more than any risk ever had. And that's when I realized the hardest truth of all. Fixing my life would require choosing what hurt. What scared me. What might fail. And I didn't know if I was brave enough anymore. Once I accepted that my life hadn't been ruined by accident, something shifted inside me. Not relief. Not hope. Responsibility. And that was heavier than any regret I had felt before. Because regret allows you to be a victim of the past. Responsibility forces you to admit you cooperated. 4 days after that realization, I moved through my life in a strange fog. Everything looked the same, but it no longer felt neutral. My routines felt staged, like props in a play I was tired of performing. Conversations sounded rehearsed. Smiles felt borrowed. I started noticing how deeply fear had shaped my identity. Fear of being judged. Fear of failing publicly. Fear of making the wrong choice and having no one to blame but myself. Over time, I had confused fear with wisdom. Every easy choice had whispered the same promise, you'll be safe. And every one of them had quietly added a condition, but you want to be alive. I tried to imagine what my life would look like if nothing changed. Not 5 years from now. 10. 20. The image that came back wasn't dramatic. It was numb, a version of me still functioning, still explaining away dissatisfaction, still telling myself it was too late to start over. That version of me scared me more than poverty, loneliness, or failure ever could. I realized then that my biggest fear wasn't change. It was permanence. I began to question everything I had accepted without thought. Why was I doing this job? Why was I maintaining relationships that felt hollow? Why was I living in a way that required constant distraction to tolerate the answers were uncomfortable? Because it was easier. Because it didn't provoke conflict. Because it allowed me to hide in plain sight. I had built a life where nothing was demanded of me, and slowly, I had demanded nothing of myself. One night, I sat alone and tried to remember the last time I had felt proud. Not relieved. Not comfortable. Proud. The silence that followed that question was devastating. I had avoided failure so effectively that I had also avoided achievement. That's when I understood something no one had ever told me clearly. You don't destroy your life by making one terrible decision. You destroy it by making 1,000 reasonable ones that betray who you are. I started testing myself in small, almost invisible ways. I spoke up when I would normally stay quiet. I disagreed instead of nodding along. I allowed myself to want things without immediately dismissing them as unrealistic. Each time, my heart raced. My hands shook. My mind screamed that I was being reckless. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something else. Energy. It was faint at first, like a muscle that hadn't been used in years. But it was there. Still, doubt followed closely behind. Late at night, I questioned everything. Was this just a crisis, a delayed rebellion? Was I romanticizing difficulty because I was bored? Those thoughts were persuasive. They almost pulled me back. Almost convinced me to apologize to my old life and resume the role I had perfected. What stopped me was a single realization. Even if change failed, at least the failure would be mine. I began preparing quietly. Not dramatically. I didn't announce transformations or burn bridges. I simply stopped reinforcing a life that didn't fit me anymore. I let some connections fade. I stopped investing energy where there was no return. I simplified my existence in ways that felt both frightening and freeing. People noticed. They asked if something was wrong. If I was unhappy. I didn't know how to answer that question honestly. I wasn't unhappy. I was unfinished. The closer I got to making real changes, the louder the fear became. It told me I was ungrateful. That others had it worse. That I was risking stability for an abstract idea of fulfillment. And maybe that was true. But I had learned something crucial. Stability without meaning isn't security. It's sedation. The night before everything changed, I barely slept. My mind replayed every mistake I might make. Every consequence I couldn't control, every version of myself that might fail spectacularly. And yet, beneath all of that, there was a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in years. Choosing what was easy had cost me my sense of self. Choosing what was hard might finally give it back. I didn't know where this path would lead. I only knew that continuing as I was would slowly erase me. So I made the decision I had avoided my entire life. I chose uncertainty over numbness. Risk over regret. Truth over comfort. And as terrifying as that choice was, it felt like the first honest thing I had done in years. The moment I finally chose what was hard, nothing magical happened. There was no rush of confidence, no sudden clarity, no feeling of redemption. What I felt instead was exposure. Like I had stepped into cold air without armor. Starting over stripped me of every excuse I had relied on. I could no longer blame circumstances, timing, or other people. Every outcome now belonged to me. That was both terrifying and strangely grounding. The early days were the hardest. Without the familiar structure of my old life, I felt disoriented. I second-guessed everything. Small decisions felt enormous. I realized how much I had depended on routines not because they supported me, but because they protected me from choice. Some mornings I woke up with a tight knot in my chest, convinced I had made a mistake I wouldn't be able to undo. The temptation to go back was constant. The old life was still there, waiting, offering safety in exchange for silence. I could return. Apologize. Explain it all away as a phase. But every time I imagined going back, I felt something close to grief. Not relief. Grief. Because returning would mean confirming that fear had been right all along. I learned quickly that choosing what is hard doesn't make you brave. It makes you honest. And honesty comes with consequences. There were moments of loneliness so sharp they felt physical. Moments when I missed being needed, even if that need had once suffocated me. Moments when I envied people who seemed content with simple answers and predictable lives. I failed more than once. I made decisions that didn't work. I trusted people who didn't deserve it. I discovered limits I didn't want to admit existed. Each failure hurt, but none of them felt like betrayal. Because for the first time, I wasn't betraying myself. Slowly, something unfamiliar began to grow. Not happiness. Presence. I started noticing how time felt when I wasn't rushing through it or numbing it away. I noticed how fear changed when I stopped running from it. It became information instead of a command. I began to understand that discomfort wasn't the enemy I had imagined. Avoiding it had been. There was a night, months later, when I realized I hadn't thought about my old life all day. The comparison had faded without effort. The guilt had softened. The urgency to justify my choices had disappeared. That was when I understood that I hadn't ruined my life. I had postponed it, and postponement, unlike destruction, can be undone. Regret still visits me sometimes. Not as punishment, but as a reminder. A reminder of how easily life can slip into autopilot. How convincing comfort can be when it asks nothing of you. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need to burn everything down to change your life. You don't need permission to want something different. And you don't need to wait until things are unbearable to take yourself seriously. The choices that feel easiest now are often the ones that will demand payment later. I learned that the hard way. Choosing what is hard doesn't guarantee success. It doesn't promise happiness. It doesn't protect you from pain. What it gives you is ownership. And ownership is the foundation of a life that feels real. I don't know where my path will lead. I still make mistakes. I still feel fear. But I no longer confuse comfort with meaning, or silence with peace. I am no longer proud of how well I endure. I am proud of how honestly I live. If there's one thing I wish someone had told me sooner, it's this. The moment you realize your life feels empty is not a failure. It's an invitation. And the most dangerous choice you can make, is to ignore it and stay where it's easy. Because staying is also a decision. And it's the one that almost erased me.